If you can give a round of applause, please. I'd like to invite on stage Rich Marsden from eBuyer, Andrew McCarthy from Fantastic Media, and John Graham from Evolvement Group. Thanks for joining us, guys. I know you guys have got the wrinkles, you've got the grey hairs, you've been through the process, and that's what this is all about. So, my first question, how do you determine if you and your business is ready to sell? And what are the common mistakes business owners make when valuing their business? Andrew, over to you for that.
Okay, so I don't want to repeat what was said this morning in terms of sort of tax planning and economic cycles and all that kind of stuff. Every business owner in here is operating in a different business, a different sector, so it's quite a diverse group. So I think if I'm looking at a general theme, I'd probably say to you that the main motivation to sell is when your drive and your energy for your business is wearing thin and you can't take it to the next level. So if we talk about, you can only sell your business once, and if your business is netting a few $100K a year and you're reaping the benefits of that, you've got to ask yourself, well, I can sell it and I can get 3 or 4 times that. You know, we talked about the multiples this morning, or I can continue to run and that money comes back to me. So I'll run it while ever I'm making money and I've got the motivation to do it. I've got the energy to do it and the drive. But once that starts to wane, you've got to look at whether you're holding the business back and whether actually it would be better off selling part of the shares, all of your shares, stepping aside, bringing in a successor to take the business on to the next level. Everybody will, you'll get all of the advice from lots of experts about your sort of retirement planning and all the rest of it. But I think personally it comes down to when you think you've run your course. You know, you're losing that motivation in your vocation.
And sometimes you say that isn't about totally exiting. Sometimes you can just step back, become a chair or whatever it might be, and bring an MD in to take the business to the next level. They might have that skill set. So this is all about timing on that energy level, 100%. Rich, I want to put this one to you because you and I knew each other before your relatively recent acquisition, and the process wasn't a smooth one and it wasn't a quick one. How did you identify and approach your potential acquisition target? What influenced your choice?
I think for me it was a set. I was already in the sector, so I'd done 25 years in the hardware sector, so I was always looking to get into a business that complemented my skills, my knowledge, my relationships. I think that was quite important. In terms of, I think when you say how do you look at a business, what's it going to be worth, the ownership, the current ownership always has an overinflated view, in my opinion, of what their business will be worth. We talk about multiples, but it's really worth what someone's prepared to pay. And in my example, we had to do the rounds around private equity. It was worth what basically private equity were prepared to fund. And that's always a challenge, is going, well, this person wants that for the business and I think you should get that for your business. But actually the bank says it's only worth X, and that bit is negotiation. In that bit is always really, really challenging. I found the process, I have to be really honest with you, because Gary said to be honest with you guys today, I found the process horrendous. In terms of, you say we want to buy a business, sounds really simple, but actually I caught the back end of the process earlier when the gentleman said about the heads of terms, and heads of terms are not really worth anything, in effect. It means nothing. It sort of gives you a rough outline for a deal. The amount of work that goes on post them heads of terms is frightening. And if you're not ready for it, both emotionally, in your business with the right stack, the right data, the sheer volume of work is really difficult for me to tell you how much it is. I'm sure those who've been through a process similar will go, it's just a huge amount of work, which takes time. And there's a lot of expensive people always on lots of calls every week to try and get to a point where you get to a deal, and deals can fall over the smallest of things. It's a really, really, really challenging process, and I think I agree wholeheartedly with the time to sell your business is when you've stopped, when you don't have the drive to move it forward, but actually probably it's maybe 12 months before that, because that's probably when you've got the drive and motivation to be able to actually go through the process, which is a challenging process and has lots and lots of ups and downs. So it's relatively, for me as the acquirer, it was stay in the sector that I know, because I know I can bring my relationships and knowledge. And then target-wise, there's not a huge amount of companies that do what eBuy does, so it was fairly simplistic. We had 3 targets, 2 dropped out due to price, and so we just kept on with the eBuy one. And as you know, a COVID-19 crisis, then a cost of living crisis tipped us off twice, but we managed to get the deal over the line a third time lucky, some say.
And just remind me, how long did from you first kind of mooting that was an option to signing the deal and taking over the business, what was the length of time?
It was 4 years. Yeah, it was a 4-year process, which is not typical. I think it's probably a 9 to 14-month process if you get it done. But we were dealing with, I love the guys at West Retail. West Retail, we were buying the business off Wren Kitchens, which made it even more complex because they were a single shareholder really in terms of owning the business. So it was one decision maker. He's also running £1 billion kitchen business, moving into America while the acquisition was going on. So trying to get Malcolm to sign paperwork, look at data was immensely complex. So ours was probably longer than what any typical one would be, but it is still probably a 9 to 12 to 14 month process, even if you get everything right. And obviously we were using private equity funding, so that made it even more challenging in terms of getting the funding in place because it was an expensive acquisition, but worth it when you get through, right?
Well, we'll come on to that in a moment, right? Andrew, if I can put the same question to you, because you're here because you've sold businesses.
I've sold and acquired businesses,
but you've recently acquired one. So what was the reason you acquired? Because was it you know, I've been in the sector for 25 years and I know the sector, or was it something else?
So yeah, I suppose we've talked a lot about the risks and you know, words of caution really about buying businesses today, and that's right, absolutely, and that's why you need the experts on your side. But buying a business is also can be part of a building strategy, and actually, if that's a quick way of expanding and bringing in skills that you don't have in house, I wouldn't want to deter everybody from doing it. Is what I'm saying. You know, there's an awful lot of negativity about the process. Well, businesses get bought and sold every day. You know, if you manage the risks and you understand what you're buying, it's a quick way of increasing your revenue, improving your skills, bringing in talent into the business. You know, and they're the things really that we looked at as Fantastic Media when we were looking to expand.
So yours was about bolting on a complementary offering, so you could kind of cross. Yeah,
exactly. Something that we did that we weren't experts in, and we could have hired people, and it would have just taken longer. So it's a shortcut to doing that.
So sometimes when you're acquiring a business, it doesn't need to be a multi-million-pound business. It can be a complementary skill set. It can be another product offering that complements what you've got. Sometimes it's about getting into another geography, and that can quite often be a reason to acquire. John, one for you, if I may. You're slightly different because you've built a multi-million-pound business with somebody that you're relatively close with, and then realised actually you were going in different paths and you decided to exit. At what point and why did you decide to exit, and how did you go about choosing the right team to help you through those kind of tricky times?
Moving into America while the acquisition was going on, so trying to get Malcolm to sign paperwork, look at data was immensely complex. So ours was probably longer than what any typical one would be, but it is still probably a 9 to 12 to 14 month process, even if you get everything right. And obviously we were using private equity funding, so that made it even more challenging in terms of getting the funding in place because it was an expensive acquisition, but worth it when you get through, right? I think
Andrew, if I can put the same question to you, because you're here because you sold businesses.
I've sold and acquired business, You've
recently acquired one. So what was the reason you acquired? Because was it you know, I've been in the sector for 25 years and I know the sector, or was it
so yeah, I suppose we've talked a lot about the risks and you know, words of caution really about buying businesses today, and that's right, absolutely, and that's why you need the experts on your side. But buying a business is also can be part of a building strategy, and actually, if that's a quick way of expanding and bringing in skills that you don't have in house, I wouldn't want to deter everybody from doing it. Is what I'm saying. You know, there's an awful lot of negativity about the process. Well, businesses get bought and sold every day. You know, if you manage the risks and you understand what you're buying, it's a quick way of increasing your revenue, improving your skills, bringing in talent into the business. You know, and they're the things really that we looked at as Fantastic Media when we were looking to expand.
So yours was about bolting on a complementary
service offering, Yeah, exactly. Something that we weren't experts in, and we could have hired people, and it would have just taken longer. So it's a shortcut to doing that.
So sometimes when you're acquiring a business, it doesn't need to be because this is something I hear all the time. We don't need a shareholders agreement. We get on really well. We're best friends. We are this, that, and the other. And it's great when you've got a business that's turning over a few quid. Yours was turning over kind of 12, 13, 14 million. That's not a small business. And of course, what happens when you decide to go your own way, there's a lot more to be fought over, and the importance of a shareholders agreement becomes apparent. So, it does seem like a huge investment for that kind of legal document, but actually it saves you a whole load of pain and grief down the line if you're not careful. So, when you said you kind of got the wrong advice, was that because you didn't select the right people, you didn't ask the right questions? What would you recommend to anybody that's choosing those advisors?
I'd sort of lost, like everyone said, I'd lost my passion. It wasn't the business that we set up. They'd gone a different path, which I wasn't too happy with. And obviously, when you build a business like that, it becomes your family. So we had 60 odd staff, and that's where it was so difficult to even think about leaving, because then you feel like it's your.
It's easy, isn't it? John down the pub knows what he's talking about, right? Absolutely. One for you two guys, kind of Rich and Andrew. Tell us a little bit about the negotiation process. Is it just a big game of brinksmanship and who's prepared to kind of hold out and who's got the kahunas to stick to it, or what's it?
Well, I think in my specific negotiation, it was a take or leave. I was really clear on the two targets that we had, and so when we came to eBuyer, and because it was a non-core asset, as you say, in the group, the owner didn't need to sell. Obviously, Wren Kitchens is a hugely successful business on its own, so they could have carried on. So we got a little bit of an ultimatum of take or leave, which is part of the reason why it took so long, because initially I was like, well, no, we'll leave it then. And they were prepared to leave it, so it's me knocking back on the door 6 months later to go, are you sure you don't want to have another chat about this? So yeah, there was, I suppose it's like any negotiation, there's brinkmanship, but I think to touch on the point, getting the right advice, we spent a fortune on due diligence, we spent a lot of money, which was painful at the time, but we got the right advice from the right people who know the intricate ways of which a deal can be structured, because actually the headline price is one thing. So people, when you talk the headline price of the purchase with an eBuyer, people go, oh, you've probably overpaid in terms of what the market rate would be based off a multiple. We didn't buy off a multiple. We bought off based net asset value that was going to be left in the business, and we bought, in effect, paid for opportunity in the future with a business that's got 280,000 square foot of warehouse in, with capacity to 10 times in that building. So we were paying a lot for the opportunity element, but also with the negotiation, it ended up, instead of being cash free and debt free as an acquisition, which typically a lot are, where they say, well, we won't leave you with any debt, but we won't leave you with any cash. We walked into the business with quite a large sum of cash left there, which in effect would come off the purchase price. So the headline price was higher than what most people would want to pay, but when you structure a deal based off the asset value, we ended up with enough working capital to not require any external contribution, which for us was really beneficial, particularly with interest rates being quite high, and being a leveraged acquisition. So there's so many different ways I think you can negotiate. You don't have to necessarily negotiate on the top price that you're going to be paid, because ultimately if you get the right people, the right advice, they can save you a bloody fortune. And so it would always be, make sure you've got the best people in the room, and that's not cheap, unfortunately, but it's well worth its weight in gold when you get round to actually signing the contract. So for me, the negotiation was really around not the headline price, more the structure of the deal. We deferred a lot of the consideration, so we've got a deferred consideration plan which has a push and pull mechanism in it, which in effect protects us against poor performance, which is great right now while the economy is really poor. So we can push out that deferred. Likewise, they can pull it in if we do really, really well. Again, that's a negotiation which is really, really important to me, because I didn't want to be sat 18 months in going, the market's not come back as well as what we can. But we still got our neck on the line for this year's deferred consideration. So things within the negotiation, there's so much away from just price, which that's where the experts will be able to guide you. And I got my advice, and the structure of our deal came through my my deal team. So it was pretty good, pretty money well spent in the end.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. I think you use your deal team to take away some of those pain points. So the negotiation can become quite emotional. And actually, it's better to try and keep at arm's length. Let the experts, thrash through some of those technical points around valuation or tax or warranties or whatever, and allow you to stay one step removed. I think that's really important. And the only other comment I'd add to that is I think it very much depends on the nature of the buyer. So if you're selling to a similar sized business, you're selling to somebody who's financially the equivalent of you, you're not selling to a big PLC, there's not a big American corporate coming in. They're going to behave very differently to a private equity house, or they're going to have a different agenda and different requirements, and they're going to focus on different issues. So sometimes if it's a PLC, they just want to get the deal done pretty quickly. They want to make the announcement, get the good news out there. If you're buying a company yourself, you imagine yourself in that position. You're not going to want to waste your money. You're not going to overpay for this business. You're probably going to be chipping it at the last minute. You're going to be looking at negotiating tactics to try and maximise the value from your point of view. So I think it very much depends on the nature of the buyer.
These things don't often run smoothly. We've just heard a couple of examples there. What do you do when things start to go horribly wrong? What's your immediate reaction, and what do you do?
I bought a dog, so not even joking. I literally was. I got a call to say that we had investment funding which was pulled in when the war in Ukraine went. So that was sort of 9 months of work to get to a point where we had a deal signed. Should have signed it in the April, and in the February the investment funding fell away. My instant reaction was to go and buy a dog. And still with us today. Bingo. He's not come today, unfortunately. He's very busy. But I think resilience. Everyone's in this room because of really every entrepreneur is really resilient. You've all had your ups and downs. No doubt you're all going through your ups and downs. And the difference between those who can and those who don't is just the fact that you get up every morning and you find a way. And I think for me, when a deal has so many ups and downs, doesn't it? Some people will say to you, such smooth sailing, really easy, and you go, I wouldn't mind a piece of that. Ours was really complicated, really complex, ebbed and flowed. It's emotional, and it's enjoyable at the end. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're really pleased we got it done, but I think the key thing you just got to have is just resilience, and you can find a way. I think when you want to do something, you want to achieve something, then you just keep going and you just keep pushing and keep prodding, keep negotiating and keep bending a little bit, and then eventually you can make a deal happen. So for me, it was every time we had a bad moment, whether that was, that was probably the worst moment, although we got the dog out of it, but it was, the funding's been pulled, okay, great, we've got to start again from scratch. Well, you can easily just go, that's it, I've had enough. 9 months, it's too long. But actually, just go again, because if you want something to happen, I'm a big believer in you can make anything you want happen if you really want it to. So that was the only thing I would say is resilience, really.
What about you, Andrew? What would you say?
I agree with all of that. I think the other thing is, sometimes you might need to walk away. It depends, doesn't it? If you've got your eyes on the prize and it's the right deal, then the obstacles and the bumps in the road you can find a way around. But if the deal's moved so much and it's not right, just be willing to walk away, and don't spend a lot of time on that abortive process, because the last thing you want to do is incur all of the professional fees and all of the costs if the deal's not right. I think I'd pass on it and move on.
And sometimes you've just got to have the balls to do that and realise this is a dead end. Absolutely. John, I'm interested from your point of view. Yours wasn't particularly that per se, but from you deciding you wanted to exit to you actually being out of that business and then starting again, which is effectively what you've done. How long did that process take, and did it take longer? Was it more frustrating than you expected?
Resilience. Everyone's in this room because of really every entrepreneur is really resilient. You've all had your ups and downs. No doubt you're all going through your ups and downs. And the difference between those who can and those who don't is just the fact that you get up every morning and you find a way. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, when a deal has so many ups and downs, isn't it? Some people will say to you, such smooth sailing. really easy, and you go, I wouldn't mind a piece of that. Ours was really complicated, really complex, ebbed and flowed. It's emotional, and it's enjoyable at the end. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're really pleased we got it done, but I think the key thing you just got to have is just resilience, and you can find a way. You know, I think, you know, when you want to do something, you want to achieve something, then you just keep going, and you just keep pushing, and keep prodding, keep negotiating, and keep bending a little bit, and then eventually you can make a deal happen. So for me, it was every time we had a bad moment, whether that was, you know, that was probably the worst moment, although we got the dog out of it, but it was, you know, the funding's been pulled, okay, great, we've got to start again from scratch. Well, you can easily just go, that's it, I've had enough. You know, 9 months is too long, but actually you just go again, you know, because if you want something to happen, I'm a big believer in you can make anything you want happen if you really want.
And look, we touched on this earlier, didn't we, around, you know, letting a toxic member of staff go, and you'll actually be thankful for it 4 months later. You know, there are a number of people in this room and a few people that have been invited that are not here, that are in businesses with shareholders, with directors and partners that I know it's not harmonious, and they sometimes just don't have the energy and the capacity to make what is effectively the right decision. But I mean, if you take anything from this is, you know, it is tough ripping that plaster off, but actually that weight lifted off your shoulders and you're now rebuilding a business, you will be thankful for it in the end. So sometimes you just got to rip the plaster off. Post-transaction, what are the mistakes that you've made in terms of integrating, you know, from culturally, you know, getting that communication across to clients, getting that communication across to the teams once the NDAs are listed? What are the mistakes that you've made or come across in terms of integrating the teams and the clients and the suppliers to make sure you've got a smooth transition? Andrew?
I'll go with that one. I think we mentioned earlier this morning that, you know, during the deal process, you're pretty much under an NDA, so you can't bring that many people into the process with you. You know, let's say you've got a big workforce. So the day it's announced is often a bit of a shock to lots of people. In my experience, the businesses I've been involved with, it's not so much the customers. Customers are generally all right. If if they've got any concerns, obviously you need to manage that. But generally speaking, the customers are okay with it. But it's getting the staff on board, getting the staff to share into the vision of the new business, the new combined business, and that does take a lot of time and effort. And really, the mistakes in the past are perhaps not. Really not dedicating enough time to that, to actually getting people. It's not just about getting them in a room and doing a PowerPoint presentation. It's about getting them to buy into the culture of a business and working with them over a period of time. I think that for me is probably the single biggest challenge when you're buying a business. Is everyone focuses on the transaction. You know, we've got lots of professionals talking about the deal itself, and then once that deal's done, they move on to the next one. And you're left with two businesses that you're trying to pull together, and actually trying to get that cultural fit is the biggest challenge. Yeah,
I'd agree. I think one thing is there's no big moment anymore. I don't think, unless my deal team didn't like me, we didn't go out for dinner. Found out at midnight that after sitting in a hotel all day that the deal was done and signed, and there's a lot of paperwork going backwards and forwards, but it's all digitalised now. So I was quite looking forward to that moment where you go, oh, it's done. But actually, it's like, oh, it's done. All right, okay. Brilliant.
Where's the dog?
And we're going in tomorrow. So, we arrived on site and we did an enormous amount of due diligence and arrived on site, 256 people, of which hardly any of them were in the building. So when we arrived, because they hadn't told anyone and it was all under NDA, we walked in to say, hi, we're here. And it was like, oh, we're here. Where is everyone? Oh, they all work from home on Wednesdays. Okay. And that was literally like, true story. And would they be able to come in? And about 50% of them refused to come in. So it was like, well, this is going to be interesting. And then that comes back to the culture, right? So ultimately, your biggest challenge isn't your suppliers or your customers, because you know both of them. And generally speaking, if you have a really good offering on both sides, you're going to do well. But the people are challenging, you know, and I don't mean that as individual level. I think the culture that you want to bring in, we'd been into a business that for 10 years hadn't had senior leadership on site. So, you know, all of a sudden we were telling people that we expected them to turn up to meetings. Yeah, well, why would we not? We want to build great things, and we're going to do that together. And that's probably been always the biggest challenge. I think if I look at times when I've been into other businesses, when I worked for a family business for 20 years, and we did quite a number of acquisitions, and I would always be sent in to sort of be the Mr. Fixer, if you like. Early on in my career, I would change too many things too quickly. You've got to be really, really, really careful. And now there's a golden rule. It's 90 days. We don't touch anything for 90 days. So literally nothing. The first 90 days, I meet with every single person in that organisation, irrelevant to the role. I have a fact file which I create, which tells me everything I need to know about the business. And then I wait. And some of the people who came in with me, because we built a new exec team to go into eBuyer, would be like, Rich, but we've got this problem. We want to fix it tomorrow. I'm like, we're not doing anything until the 91st day, because you have to really understand as much as you can. And 90 days isn't long enough. But if you change things too quickly, you can really unsettle A, the workforce, B, some of the processes which you probably don't think make sense, but actually just work. And so previous role where I went in and ripped up the business on day 3, it was a total disaster for the next 6-7 months while people were leaving and didn't like my abrasive style, and so you end up having to replace them, and you don't really understand the business as well as what you should. So a bit of advice I would always give is, if you're going in, is just give it 90 days. It's not a long period of time in a business's history, to wait and see and understand. And then when you make the changes, present them to the people, show them why you're making those changes and what it means for them and what the journey they're coming on, and that's probably one of the reasons why I've said, what mistakes did we make? I'd like to say probably none, because it's our 3rd or 4th time. There'll be some, but as a general rule, I think when you get the people on board, you're pretty much in a good place, aren't you? And it helps massively.
And when you do that, when you sit back for 90 days and you had a business where it had not had any leadership for 10 years and people were working from home, even though, I can't remember this, that 80% of them live within 5 miles or something ridiculous. It was ridiculous. When you present that plan and the new way of working, does that kind of cause an element of those people to go, this ain't for us, we're out? Yeah. So there's some collateral damage with that process.
Yeah, I think there is. Data tells you a lot, right? So you can look at management accounts, you can look at staff retention surveys, you can look at anything you want, and it will give you a good feel for a business. But as the other panelists agree, there's nothing quite like being on the ground. Then you really feel the fabric of the business, if you like. I like to be in the warehouse on a Thursday night and watch the late shift, and I'm not sure our teams like it quite as much, but you sort of get to know people and you get to know what's happening, etc. I think for us, we knew going in we would have to have a fairly significant headcount reduction, so we were kind of quite sheltered from some of those things. So we mandated everyone to come back to the office about a week after we'd arrived, because they quite bluntly refused to. And it was like, well, we're used to working from home, and it's like, no, but we need you to understand what the new leadership wants from you. And a lot of people refused, and so they left. But we're in a position where we needed to reduce headcount anyway. But yeah, it's challenging. I think the people in any business, as you guys will know in your own businesses, if you look around the room, and you'll all have members of staff which are a pain in your backside. I think Gary once said to me at one of my previous businesses, if they don't value align, then you need to remove them. You need to get people who value align only. And I think I said to you in my office, Gary, but I'd need to remove 90% of my people, Gary. And he went, well, do it. And I'm like, when he walked out, I said, this guy crazy, how can I do that? But actually, one thing I've taken from my years of knowing Gary and working with Gary, that value alignment is so critical. Because if you've got people in your business who don't align with your values and don't want to do the things the way that you want to do them, it's such a negative impact. And so in the end of that business, we ended up replacing 90% of the people, and that business doubled in size, and everyone there was really happy. And we're probably on the same process in our business today. We've made a lot of change with people, because some people just get used to working in a way that they like to work, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it might not fit your agenda. And ultimately, I want a business where everyone enjoys working and everyone wants to come in and everyone feels passionate about the opportunity. So, I think it's all about the people, isn't it? Good or bad.
100%. Andrew, this one for you. You've sold businesses. I mean, even before your fantastic days, this has been a career for you. What's the hardest part of selling a business?
I would say the hardest part is being sort of being realistic about the business's value to a buyer. Okay, so we've spoken a lot about, you know, how you value a company and very, very simple rules of thumb. That formula, you know, of 3, 4, 5, 6 times EBITDA, I think is useful, but it is just a rule of thumb. You know, you've got to try and put yourself in the position of the buyer and understand their motivation, where they see the value, and adjust your thinking and your mentality. Because if you're just sticking to a figure, whatever that is, and it's just unrealistic, and all of the market feedback is telling you, well, that's not what the market sees as the value of this business, then you're going to have to adjust to that. And I think, yeah, I'd say that's probably, you know, in terms of the biggest challenge is trying to be realistic about how the buying world sees your business. Yeah.
Fab. I want to ask this question to each of you, just if you can give us a relatively succinct answer. If you could go back and change one decision during the purchase, the sale, the exit, what's the one thing that you'd change and do differently? John?
But I'd need to remove 90% of my people, Gary. And he went, we'll do it. And I'm like, when he walked out, this guy crazy, how can I do that? But actually, one thing I've taken from my years of knowing Gary and working with Gary, that value alignment is so critical. Because
you just put up with 2 years of pain before you finally make the decision, right? Yeah. Absolutely. So, you know, be quick off the mark if you know something's not right. Make a decision and do rip that plaster off. Rich, what about yourself? What's the one thing that you'd change?
Good question. I probably would. I mean, in my current acquisition, probably nothing. If I'm really honest, I think you go in and you have a plan and you execute that plan, and we've done that. Some things have worked better than others, naturally. Some people say we could act quicker. Maybe we could have made the first cut deeper, for example. That would have saved us a little bit more turbulence. But as a general rule, in this acquisition, I don't feel there's any negatives, because that's because of experience. But probably my biggest mistake I've ever made was going into the acquisition and changing too many things too quickly. That was probably one thing that always sits with me, and probably has bode me well in this acquisition, because we've gone in and taken our time with the right plan and the right structure. But my biggest mistake previously was probably going in and thinking you can change the world overnight, and you can't do that in an acquired business that's used to a way of working, unless, well.
And particularly, you know, we're talking scale here. You know, you're talking a business here that's turning over significant amounts of money. This is a huge business. You know, nearly 300 employees, etc. You know, so that amount of turbulence just.
It ripples.
You know,
and you can't be around a business of our scale every day. I mean, it's sort of quite challenging to see every department every day. That's also a challenge. You've got to make sure your people on your team are pushing your message. But you know, it's all relative, isn't it? The pain points are still the same. There's no the worries and the concerns are still the same, irrelevant to the size of your business. I always think, like, you know, your gas bill's still expensive. You know, your electric bills are still expensive. Your people can be brilliant and can also be a pain in the arse, but. That's business, isn't it? That's why we get up in the morning to do it. You know, we love it. That's why you're all here, really.
I'd hate to think.
Probably looking for his next acquisition. You know, it's.
I'd hate to think what your wage bill is. Andrew, obviously you've been on both sides of the fence.
I'll give you 2 answers then. So just briefly, I'd say from a personal perspective that you're aligned with whoever your, let's call them stakeholders. So it might be that you've taken on investment. It might be that you've got a backer. It might be that you're in partnership with somebody. Make sure that you're all aligned in terms of what you're trying to achieve. If you're in the position that you own 100% of the business and it's just your baby, great. But if you are working with people and as part of that merger, you know, it's an enlarged team, try and understand what their vision is. What are they trying to achieve? Personally, and this is reflected in my sort of career, you know, I'm looking at a portfolio of investments and where I'm going to go next. So if I've bought a business, I've got a view to what I'm trying to achieve with it. Now, you'll get knocked off course and it won't go exactly to plan, but if the person you're in business with doesn't share that vision, you're going to have a problem, and you know, you'll end up having to come to some kind of compromise, you know. And then I think looking at in my experience of working with other people and looking at their exit, I think the biggest single mistake that a lot of people make is not having a very clear view of what they do post-sale. So they've had their dream exit, they've banked a chunk of money. It might be enough to retire on, it might not, but they've got no real idea of what they're doing next. they've just been that focused on the deal. They might not be old enough to retire, but even if they are, and even if they've got enough money, actually a year later, they're really struggling with all that spare time. I see that time and time again. So I'd really encourage people to think about what happens after the deal.
I think it's an important one. There's a gentleman that I invited onto this panel, but unfortunately he's travelling at the moment. He sold his business 6 years ago for an 8-figure sum. And here he is 6 years later, like minister without portfolio, and he says, I've got nothing to get me out of bed. He says, I'm just drifting through life. I've got no fire in my belly. So you can have all the money in the bank, and he does plenty of travel, but he's literally got nothing to get his teeth into. And he said, nobody's been there for me. Nobody told me it was going to be so lonely. And that's 6 years. So that's something just to bear in mind, is you've got to start to think about what life after sale is like. That's right. Hold on. We'll come to questions in a moment. Hold that thought, if we could, because I want to keep us on time. You might have answered this question, and if you have, great. But if you haven't, so there's plenty of people in this room that are going to be starting to think about what that transaction looks like. It might be an acquisition for whatever reason. It might be an exit for whatever reason. It might be a sale. What piece of advice would you give to somebody that's looking to undertake their first transaction? Andrew.
I would probably concentrate on what I'd call the sort of commercial due diligence. So we've spoken a lot about the financials and the legals and stuff, but I think you've got to be really clear on why you're wanting to do that transaction commercially. Where does it fit in? How does it improve your customer offering? How does it make you more competitive? Park the value in the transaction itself for the time being. There's lots of experts who will help you with that, but I think you've got to have a really clear vision of why you're wanting to do something, whether that is exit or acquire, and that's got to be based on changes in the marketplace. What is it that you're needing to respond to, and really focus on that before you get too bogged down in all the technicalities and lots of people telling you how things should be, valued, and all the risks to be aware of, and the tax planning and all the rest of it. Just get back to the basics in terms of the commercial opportunity.
Fab. Rich, same question for you. First transaction, what would you recommend?
I'll probably just say control the emotion which comes up in any transaction, selling or buying. I was probably too close emotionally to the deal near the end. Desperate after 2 failed attempts, desperate to get the third over the line. I'm probably, you'd say yes. I would have said yes to anything at the time, in terms of, yeah, that's fine. And lots comes up in the final week. I think that's one thing where, literally until right on the day of our transaction, there was some issue with currency conversions, which caused a load of problems, and the emotions are high. So if you can control your emotions in the lead up or during the course of the deal, because I think to touch on one of the points was you have to be prepared to walk away, and ultimately walk away from either the purchase or the sale if it doesn't fit for you. And emotions generally probably wouldn't let you do that. So if you can, it's a transaction. It's not a wedding, a marriage. There's someone here who can help you in that area. But yeah, control your emotions and make sure you see it for what it is, which is a transaction. And if you can take that one step back, it will probably help you with clearer thinking than probably I had in the last 2 weeks of our transaction.
What piece of advice would you give to somebody that's looking to undertake their first transaction? Andrew.
I would probably concentrate on what I'd call the sort of commercial due diligence. So we've spoken a lot about the financials and the legals and stuff, but I think you've got to be really clear on why you're wanting to do that transaction commercially. Where does it fit in? How does it improve? Just one final point, just on the buying side in particular, I would also say particularly to the type of businesses in this room, cash flow. Just concentrate on cash flow, because as we've already said, the chances are the deal will be on what's called a debt-free, cash-free basis. And unless you have got enough money around you, often after an acquisition, the business performance might dip slightly, while you're bringing people on board. You might have taken your eye off the business that you're running. You've got to make sure you've got access to enough headroom to weather that, and that you don't take your eye off that sort of cash flow.